Sometimes the ones begging to die are really trying to warn us. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from tonight. And if you believe no loyal soul deserves to suffer alone, take a moment to subscribe. Because some stories do not end in victory. They end in grace. Rain tapped softly against the narrow clinic windows as midnight settled over Camp Pendleton Veterinary Center. The fluorescent lights hummed low above the euthanasia room, pale and cold, washing everything in a tired blue glow that made the stainless steel cabinets look almost ghostly. The air carried the scent of antiseptic, wet wool, and old sorrow. Staff Sergeant Caleb Turner sat motionless beside the examination table, his broad shoulders slumped beneath a faded olive-green marine jacket darkened by rainwater. At 38, Caleb still looked like the kind of man younger Marines instinctively trusted in a crisis. Tall, white-skinned, close-cropped brown hair touched lightly with gray near the temples. A faint scar rested along his jawline, nearly hidden beneath several days of exhaustion. But tonight there was nothing strong left in his eyes. Only the hollow silence of a man preparing to lose the last living thing that still knew who he used to be. On the table in front of him lay Rex, a 9-year-old German shepherd whose sable coat had once gleamed beneath desert suns and helicopter floodlights overseas. Now the fur around his muzzle had silvered with age. His breathing came shallow and uneven beneath the hospital blanket. Each breath trembled softly. The heart monitor beside him pulsed slow, steady, fragile. Dr. Emily Carter stood quietly near the counter preparing the sedative injection, her movements careful and respectful. She had performed this procedure many times before. Too many. But military dogs were always harder. Especially dogs like Rex. Dogs whose handlers looked at them like brothers instead of animals. Caleb reached down slowly, his rough hand trembling as it rested against Rex's neck. Warm fur. Fainter now than before. You do not have to keep fighting for me anymore, buddy, he whispered. Outside, wind rattled the rain gutters along the clinic roof. Somewhere, down the hallway, a phone rang once, then stopped. Rex's amber eyes remained half closed. Exhausted, distant. For 3 weeks the seizures had worsened. Confusion, restlessness, strange reactions to electrical sounds. Specialists had called it neurological decline. Age mixed with old trauma. The humane thing, they said, was to let him rest. Caleb had signed the papers an hour ago, but this felt harder than war, because war had at least allowed him to fight back. This felt like surrender. Emily stepped forward gently. Whenever you are ready. Caleb swallowed hard and nodded once. His hand never left Rex's fur. The room grew still, too still. Then suddenly Rex stirred. Not violently, not in panic. Slowly, painfully, like something deep inside him had summoned one final reserve of strength. His paws slipped weakly against the blanket as he pushed himself upward. Caleb's eyes widened. Rex, the old German shepherd, leaned forward with a strained breath and wrapped both front legs around Caleb's shoulders. An embrace, tight enough to stop the Marine's breathing cold. Rain whispered against the glass. The monitor beeped softly, and then Rex growled. Low, deep, not at Caleb. At something behind Dr. Emily Carter. Emily turned instinctively toward the wall. At first she saw nothing. Then her breath caught. A thin stream of dark fluid was slipping from Rex's right ear onto the white blanket below. Not normal blood. Thicker, almost black beneath the fluorescent lights. And there was another smell now beneath the antiseptic. Burned metal. Emily's pulse spiked instantly. Wait, she whispered sharply. Do not inject him. Emily moved fast now. The calm professionalism in her face sharpened by something colder. Concern. She stepped closer to Rex. The old German shepherd remained pressed against Caleb's chest, trembling faintly, his growl vibrating low in his throat like distant thunder beneath the earth. Caleb looked up. What is it? Emily leaned closer to the dark fluid staining the blanket. The metallic smell was stronger now. Wrong somehow. Not ordinary infection. Not age. I need imaging, she said quietly. Right now. Caleb blinked hard. Imaging? Emily, they already ran scans last week. Not here, they did not. Her voice stayed low but firm. And whatever this is, I do not trust it. For a second nobody moved. Only the rain spoke outside. Then Rex suddenly flinched. His body tightened against Caleb as though reacting to some distant sound no human could hear. His ears twitched sharply toward the ceiling lights. A faint whine escaped his throat. Caleb's stomach tightened instantly because he had seen that reaction before. Afghanistan. 7 years earlier. Sanjan province had smelled like dust, diesel fuel, and burning sun-baked metal. Caleb remembered the heat most of all. 112 degrees stretching endlessly across broken roads and abandoned compounds. Back then Rex had been younger. Faster. A lean black-saddled shepherd with restless amber eyes and paws that never seemed to tire. Marines trusted technology overseas. Drones. Sensors. Satellite feeds. But when patrols entered villages lined with silent windows and buried secrets, they trusted Rex more. Caleb still remembered the first day they met at Camp Lejeune. Rex had ignored every handler during evaluation drills until Caleb walked onto the training field carrying nothing but a cracked tennis ball in one hand. The dog studied him for nearly 10 seconds before trotting over quietly and sitting directly at his boots. No barking, no hesitation, just choice. From that day forward they became inseparable. 2 deployments, hundreds of patrols, countless nights sleeping beneath torn canvas while desert winds rattled the tents. Rex learned Caleb's moods before words were ever spoken. He could sense fear in breathing, grief in silence. Then came the road outside Kajaki. Late afternoon, dry mountains glowing orange beneath the sinking sun. Their convoy slowed near an abandoned irrigation ditch when Rex suddenly froze mid-step. Completely still. The same growl. The same warning. Caleb had barely shouted before the explosion erupted somewhere beneath the road shoulder. Dust swallowed everything. When the smoke finally cleared, Caleb found himself half buried against shattered concrete, with Rex lying protectively across his chest despite bleeding from his flank and ears. The medics later said the dog likely saved 6 lives that afternoon. But after that mission something changed. Tiny things at first. Restlessness at night. Sudden reactions to high-pitched electrical sounds. Moments where Rex stared into corners nobody else noticed. The military veterinarians blamed stress exposure. Combat fatigue. Age. Caleb wanted to believe them. He needed to believe them. Back in the clinic, Emily gently touched the side of Rex's skull and paused. Beneath the fur near his right ear, she felt something hard buried deep under scar tissue. Her eyes narrowed immediately. Caleb, she whispered carefully. Did Rex ever suffer head trauma overseas? Caleb stared at her as the memory of that explosion crawled slowly back into the room like a ghost neither of them had invited. He could not answer right away. The memory hit him slowly, like cold water rising around his chest. Rex remained lying against him on the examination table now, breathing harder than before, his amber eyes half focused beneath the harsh fluorescent lights. Rainwater crawled down the clinic windows in crooked silver lines, while somewhere overhead the building ventilation rattled softly. There was an explosion, Caleb finally said quietly. 7 years ago. His voice sounded distant even to himself. Roadside blast outside Kajaki. Emily glanced toward him without speaking. Rex took the worst of it protecting me. For a moment the room fell silent except for the slow rhythm of the heart monitor. Beep, beep, beep. Fragile. Human almost. Caleb stared down at Rex and remembered the weeks after they came home from Afghanistan. The military hospital at Camp Pendleton smelled exactly the same as this clinic now. Antiseptic. Coffee gone cold. Wet concrete after rain. Caleb had spent 3 months recovering from spinal injuries and concussion symptoms, while Rex remained at the veterinary rehabilitation wing across the base. Every evening, despite the pain in his own body, Caleb wheeled himself nearly half a mile to visit the dog. Nurses used to smile when Rex heard the wheelchair approaching down the hallway. No matter how exhausted or medicated he was, the German Shepherd always tried to stand. Sometimes he failed. Sometimes he simply rested his chin against Caleb's knee and closed his eyes like that alone was enough. They healed together after that. Or at least they pretended to. Caleb left active combat duty 2 years later, but Rex stayed with him through every sleepless night that followed. Through thunderstorms that triggered old memories. Through panic attacks Caleb hid from everyone else. Through mornings where getting out of bed felt heavier than body armor ever had. Rex always knew. Always. If Caleb woke shaking from nightmares, the dog climbed beside the bed before the first light reached the windows. If crowds became too loud, Rex pressed silently against his leg until his breathing slowed again. They became familiar faces around Oceanside. The tired Marine and the old German shepherd beside him. Coffee shop owners kept dog treats behind the counter just for Rex. Children waved from sidewalks. Strangers thanked Caleb for his service, while Rex sat tall beside him like a silent guardian, carrying memories nobody else could see. But over the last 6 months something had changed. At first it was small. Rex reacting aggressively to electrical buzzing from kitchen appliances, staring at blank television screens long after they shut off, whining softly near power transformers during evening walks. Then came the nights. Around 3 in the morning, Caleb would wake to find Rex sitting motionless in dark corners of the house, ears twitching towards sounds no human could hear. Sometimes the dog trembled violently for only a few seconds before acting normal again. Other times he paced endlessly through the hallway until sunrise painted pale gold across the floorboards. Veterinarians blamed age-related neurological decline. One specialist mentioned canine dementia. Another quietly suggested euthanasia before the symptoms worsened. Caleb hated himself for eventually agreeing. Now, standing inside this freezing clinic room, he suddenly felt sick with guilt. Emily stepped away from the table and grabbed her tablet from the counter. Her expression had shifted completely now. Focused. Urgent. I need to run a high-resolution scan. Immediately, she said. Not tomorrow. Tonight. Caleb looked sharply toward her. You think something is inside his skull? Emily hesitated only briefly. I think your dog has been surviving with something buried in his head for 7 years. The lights stabilized after a few seconds, but the feeling inside the room did not. It stayed there. Heavy. Watching. Caleb slowly rose from the metal stool beside the examination table while Rex continued staring upward, his amber eyes fixed on the fluorescent panels buzzing faintly overhead. The old German shepherd's growl deepened, vibrating through his exhausted chest like distant machinery buried beneath concrete. Emily grabbed the portable scanner from the counter with steady hands that no longer felt entirely steady. I need him downstairs now, she said quietly. The imaging room has shielded equipment. Caleb nodded once and slipped his arms carefully beneath Rex's body. The dog was lighter than he should have been, bones beneath thinning fur. Years of service and hidden suffering pressed into one trembling frame. Rex rested his head weakly against Caleb's shoulder as they moved into the dim hallway beyond the euthanasia room. The clinic was nearly empty this late at night. Only muted ceiling lights remained on, casting long reflections across polished floors that smelled faintly of bleach and rainwater tracked in from outside. Somewhere far down the corridor, an air vent rattled softly. Caleb carried Rex slowly toward the elevator while Emily walked ahead, holding the scanner tablet against her chest. Neither of them spoke for several moments. The silence felt sacred somehow, like church after midnight. Caleb finally broke it. If there really is something inside him, his voice faltered. Why would it start now after all these years? Emily pressed the elevator button and watched the old doors slide open with a tired metallic groan. Sometimes fragments migrate over time, she said softly, especially near scar tissue. Caleb stepped inside with Rex still cradled against him. You mean shrapnel? Emily hesitated. Maybe. The elevator descended slowly beneath the clinic. The humming motor overhead sounded strangely loud in the confined space. Rex suddenly lifted his head again. His ears twitched sharply toward the ceiling corner security camera. A faint whine escaped his throat. Then the camera monitor flickered. Once. Twice. Static crawled briefly across the small screen before stabilizing again. Caleb looked toward Emily immediately. She noticed it too. Neither said anything. The doors opened into the lower imaging wing, where the air felt cooler and drier. The hallway lights here were dimmer, tinted pale blue against concrete walls lined with old military veterinary photographs. Images of handlers kneeling beside retired service dogs. Faces frozen forever in younger years. Loyalty captured in silence. Emily pushed open the reinforced imaging room doors, while Caleb gently placed Rex onto the scanning table. The old shepherd's breathing had become shallow again, but his eyes remained alert now. Focused. Almost fearful. Emily adjusted the machine carefully while Caleb stood nearby, one hand resting against Rex's side. Easy, buddy, he whispered. Just a few more minutes. Rex stared directly at him for a long moment, then slowly licked Caleb's wrist once. the same way he used to after patrols overseas when both of them came back alive. Emily activated the scan. The machine hummed low as the platform moved Rex carefully beneath the circular imaging ring. Seconds stretched. The only sounds were electronic beeping and rainfall echoing faintly through underground pipes. Caleb watched the monitor anxiously while gray images of Rex's skull began appearing layer by layer across the screen. Emily's face slowly changed. Her eyes narrowed, then widened. Oh my God! Caleb stepped closer instantly. What? Emily pointed silently toward the image near the base of Rex's skull. Embedded deep behind the right ear sat something metallic no larger than a fingernail clipping. But it was not ordinary shrapnel. Its edges were too symmetrical, too clean. Tiny wire-like filaments extended outward into surrounding tissue like roots buried underground. And at the center of the object, faint pulses flickered rhythmically against the scan. Caleb felt cold spread through his chest. That thing is still active. Emily swallowed hard without looking away from the screen. I do not think this is military debris anymore. Then suddenly every monitor in the room went black. Darkness swallowed the imaging room so completely that for one long second Caleb could hear nothing except Rex breathing. Slow, uneven, alive. Then the backup emergency lights flickered on overhead, casting the underground room in a dim red glow that made the concrete walls look almost rust-colored. Somewhere deeper inside the clinic, alarms chirped once before falling silent again. Emily stared at the black monitor screens in disbelief. That should not happen, she whispered. Caleb stepped closer to the table instinctively, one hand gripping Rex's shoulder. The old German shepherd had stopped growling now. Instead, he stared directly toward the dead monitors with an intensity that made Caleb's skin tighten beneath his jacket. Rain hammered softly through distant pipes overhead, sounding almost like static crawling through the walls. Emily reached for the control panel and tried rebooting the imaging system. Nothing responded. Every screen remained dark except one small portable monitor near the counter that flickered weakly with distorted interference lines. Caleb glanced toward it. At first the static looked random. Then his pulse slowed. The flickering patterns almost resembled rhythmic pulses. Like a signal, Rex suddenly whined sharply. His body stiffened against the scanning table. Emily moved toward him immediately. Easy boy. But Rex was no longer looking at the monitor. He was staring at the far corner of the room where old electrical conduit pipes disappeared into the ceiling. His ears flattened hard against his skull. Fear. Real fear. Caleb had only seen that expression twice before in combat zones moments before disaster struck. Then came the sound. Soft at first. A faint high-pitched frequency buried beneath the ventilation system. Barely audible to human ears. Emily froze. Do you hear that? Caleb nodded slowly. Yeah. Rex reacted instantly. He struggled weakly upright despite exhaustion, claws scraping lightly against the metal table. The frequency pulsed again. Higher now. Sharper. Caleb felt pressure building behind his own eyes. Rex barked once. Loud. Desperate. And suddenly the portable monitor burst back to life. The screen flashed violently with distorted military diagnostic codes before stabilizing into a grainy black interface neither of them recognized. Emily stepped closer cautiously. What is this? Lines of corrupted text crawled across the monitor too quickly to read clearly. Then one phrase froze briefly on screen before flickering again. Active neural response detected. Caleb stared at the words as cold spread through his chest. Neural response. Emily's voice lowered. The fragment inside Rex may not just be metal. The monitor glitched again. Another line appeared. Signal link unstable. Then the frequency inside the room intensified sharply. Rex cried out softly and collapsed sideways against the table, trembling violently. Caleb grabbed him immediately. Rex. The dog's breathing became ragged now, chest rising and falling too quickly beneath his aging ribs. Emily pressed trembling fingers gently against the scar near Rex's ear and felt faint vibrations beneath the skin itself. Not a pulse. Something mechanical. Something alive in a way machines should never be alive. Caleb's thoughts raced backward 7 years. Afghanistan. The explosion. The weeks afterward where military intelligence officers asked unusual questions about the blast site before quietly disappearing. At the time, none of it mattered. He only cared that Rex survived. Now doubt crawled slowly into his mind. Emily backed away from the monitor as more corrupted lines flashed across the screen. Warning, device migration critical. Oh God, she whispered. It is moving. Caleb looked down instantly at Rex. Beneath the fur near the dog's right ear, the skin had begun twitching faintly on its own, tiny spasms spreading downward toward the neck. Rex whimpered softly and pressed his head desperately into Caleb's chest like he was trying to hide from the pain. Caleb wrapped both arms around him immediately. Stay with me, buddy. Emily turned sharply toward the emergency phone mounted near the door. Dead. No signal. Every system underground had failed. The red emergency lights buzzed overhead while rainwater echoed through the distant pipes like slow footsteps somewhere above them. Then the monitor screen changed one final time. A grainy archived image appeared briefly through heavy static. A military emblem, followed by a single classified designation stamped across the screen in white letters. K9 Neural Response Program. Emily stared at it in horror. Caleb felt Rex trembling harder against him. And somewhere deep inside the old German shepherd's failing body, something hidden since the war was waking up. The footsteps above them grew louder. Slow, heavy, controlled. Caleb's body stiffened instantly beside the imaging table while old instincts sharpened through the exhaustion like blades pulled from rust. Rex heard them too. The aging German shepherd forced himself upright again despite trembling legs, ears pinned forward now, amber eyes fixed on the underground hallway doors. Protective. Always protective. Emily lowered her voice. The clinic should be empty. Another sound followed. The faint metallic click of the security lock disengaging somewhere upstairs. Caleb glanced toward the dark corridor beyond the imaging room. Can they get down here? Emily hesitated. Only through the main elevator. The emergency lights buzzed softly overhead while rain hammered the world above them. Caleb moved closer to Rex, one hand resting against the dog's shoulder as if anchoring both of them to something steady. Rex's breathing remained uneven, but the growling deep in his chest had changed now. Less fear, more certainty. Caleb knew that sound. The same warning Rex used before hidden explosives overseas, before ambushes, before danger nobody else saw coming. Emily checked the portable scan again and swallowed hard. The fragment is almost touching critical neural tissue. Caleb looked toward her sharply. How long? Maybe hours. Her eyes glistened under the emergency lights. Possibly less if his stress levels keep rising. Rex suddenly flinched hard beside them as another pulse of static crackled through the underground speakers overhead. Then a voice echoed faintly through the distorted intercom system. Calm. Male. Unfamiliar. Dr. Carter. Please remain where you are. Emily froze instantly. Caleb's jaw tightened. The voice continued through static. You are in possession of classified military property. Caleb stared toward the ceiling. Classified property. Not patient. Not service dog. Property. Rage rose slowly in his chest, cold and controlled. Rex pressed weakly against his leg as though sensing it immediately. Emily stepped closer to Caleb and lowered her voice to nearly a whisper. I think they tracked the activation signal. Caleb looked at the dead monitor screens around them. You mean they knew the second that thing woke up? Emily nodded faintly. The footsteps reached the underground hallway now. 3 people at least judging by the rhythm. Deliberate. Professional. Caleb's mind raced through possibilities automatically. No weapons. 1 exit. Injured dog. Limited time. Old training slid quietly back into place despite the years. Rex suddenly whimpered and collapsed partially against the table again. Caleb caught him immediately. The trembling beneath the scar near Rex's ear had become visible now beneath the fur itself. Tiny involuntary pulses spreading toward the neck muscles. Emily stared at the movement with horror. It is destabilizing faster. The intercom crackled again. Staff Sergeant Turner. Caleb froze hearing his name spoken by someone he had never met. The K9 requires immediate containment. Caleb's voice turned sharp. His name is Rex. Silence answered for several seconds. Then the calm voice returned. You do not understand what was implanted inside that animal. Caleb looked down at Rex. Animal. The word landed wrong. Like an insult spoken in church. He remembered the freezing nights overseas where Rex curled beside wounded Marines to keep them warm until medevac arrived. The long rehabilitation months where the dog refused to sleep unless Caleb's hospital bed remained in sight. The morning's Rex sat quietly beside the ocean, watching waves roll, and while Caleb relearned how to exist without war swallowing him whole. Not property, not animal, family. Emily suddenly inhaled sharply while staring at the scan. Caleb, he turned. Instantly, her face had gone pale beneath the red emergency lights. The device is emitting electrical spikes directly into his nervous system now. Rex cried out softly and buried his head against Caleb's chest again. Caleb wrapped both arms around him instinctively. Can you remove it? Emily hesitated only briefly. Yes. Caleb looked at her. But her voice broke slightly. The surgery could kill him. The heavy doors finally swung inward beneath the pulsing red emergency lights. 3 figures stepped into the underground hallway wearing dark civilian jackets over military uniforms stripped of visible insignia. Calm faces, controlled movements. The kind of men trained to walk into chaos without raising their voices. The tallest among them removed rainwater from his gloves with deliberate precision before speaking. Staff Sergeant Turner. His tone remained almost polite. Step away from the K9. Caleb did not move. Rex lay trembling against him on the imaging table, breathing shallow, one paw weakly pressed against Caleb's arm, as though even now the old shepherd refused to let go. Emily stepped slightly forward. He needs surgery immediately. The man's expression barely changed. Doctor, that animal is carrying sensitive military hardware. Caleb's jaw tightened hard enough to ache. He carried Marines out of combat zones. Silence answered him briefly. Somewhere overhead thunder rolled across the coastline, while water dripped rhythmically through distant underground pipes. The red emergency lights painted tired shadows beneath everyone's eyes. The man glanced toward the dead monitors. You were never supposed to access those files. Emily stared back coldly. Then maybe you should not implant experimental devices into service dogs. One of the other men shifted uneasily at that. Small, human, but Caleb noticed. The tall man finally exhaled slowly. The program ended years ago. Caleb looked down at Rex. Not for him. The man's eyes softened for the first time. Only slightly. The device was designed to improve battlefield threat detection through neurological response patterns. Emily whispered in disbelief. You turned trauma into a signal. Amplifier. Nobody answered her. Which was answer enough. Caleb remembered suddenly every strange reaction Rex had endured after Afghanistan. The nights of pacing. The sensitivity to electrical frequencies. The storms that sent him trembling into dark corners of the house. All this time the old dog had not been losing his mind. He had been surviving something hidden inside his own skull, while still trying to protect the people around him from dangers only he could sense. Rex whimpered softly against Caleb's chest. The tremors beneath his scar had spread visibly now down the side of his neck. Emily checked the scan again and felt her stomach drop. It is reaching the brain stem. Caleb looked up instantly. How long? Maybe 20 minutes before catastrophic neurological failure. The room fell silent again. The tall man removed a small secure tablet from inside his jacket and glanced toward the scan results. His face darkened immediately. The device is destabilizing faster than projected. Emily looked at him sharply. Projected? The man closed his eyes briefly, like someone carrying years of regret. The original prototypes were never intended for long-term survival. Caleb stared at him in disbelief. You left this thing inside him knowing it could do this. The man finally looked directly at Rex. Really looked. The trembling body. The exhausted amber eyes still watching every movement in the room despite overwhelming pain. No, he said quietly. We thought the blast destroyed it. Rain battered the clinic harder now. Rex suddenly cried out softly and collapsed sideways as another violent tremor passed through his body. Caleb caught him immediately. Panic flashed across his face for the first time that night. Rex. Emily moved fast toward the surgical prep cabinet. We are out of time. Caleb looked at her. Can you save him? Emily hesitated only 1 second. I can try. The tall man stepped forward. Doctor, if you remove the fragment incorrectly, the neural surge could kill him instantly. Emily snapped back without fear. If I do nothing, he dies anyway. Caleb looked between them while Rex struggled weakly for breath against his chest. The old German. Shepherd slowly lifted his head one final time and looked directly into Caleb's eyes. Trust. Pure and absolute. The same trust he carried through deserts, explosions, nightmares, and every broken piece of life afterward. Caleb felt tears burn suddenly behind his eyes. Real tears. The kind he had buried since the war. He leaned close against Rex's fur. "You stayed with me through everything," he whispered shakily. "Now it is my turn." Then he looked at Emily. "Do the surgery." The operating room smelled of antiseptic, warm circuitry, and rain drifting faintly through the clinic ventilation system. Outside, the storm continued sweeping across the California coast, but underground the world had narrowed to soft monitor beeps and the quiet determination of exhausted people refusing to let one old dog die alone. Emily stood beneath the surgical lights with steady hands despite the fear pressing behind her ribs. Rex lay motionless on the table now, sedated carefully but not fully unconscious, his breathing shallow beneath the blankets warming his aging body. Caleb remained beside him until the final possible second, one rough hand resting against the German shepherd's chest. "You come back to me," he whispered softly. Rex's tail moved once against the blanket. "Barely, but enough." Emily nodded gently toward the door. "I need to begin." Caleb stepped back slowly, like every inch away from that table physically hurt. The tall military official stood silently near the wall now, no longer cold or defensive, just tired, human again. As Caleb passed him, the man spoke quietly without meeting his eyes. "For what it is worth, Sergeant, he exceeded every expectation we ever had." Caleb stopped walking. "He was never your experiment." The man lowered his head slightly. No argument came. The surgical doors closed with a soft metallic seal, leaving Caleb alone in the dim underground hallway outside the operating room. The red emergency lights had finally faded back to normal illumination, but the building still felt strangely hollow after everything that had happened. Caleb sat heavily against the wall beneath an old framed photograph of a Marine kneeling beside a retired service dog sometime during the Gulf War. Dust clung faintly to the edges of the frame. Loyalty surviving decades. Hours passed slowly underground. Rain softened overhead until only occasional droplets echoed through the distant pipes. Caleb did not sleep. Could not. Sometimes he stared at the closed operating room doors. Sometimes he stared at his hands, remembering all the years those hands clipped leashes, loaded trucks, scratched behind sable ears after impossible days. Around 3 in the morning, the tall official quietly approached, carrying 2 paper cups of coffee from the upstairs break room. He offered one silently. Caleb accepted after a long pause. The coffee was terrible, burned and bitter, somehow comforting anyway. "Did you know?" Caleb finally asked. The man stared into his cup for several seconds. "Not everything." His voice sounded older now. The original program was supposed to improve battlefield threat detection through neurological signal response. Caleb looked toward the operating room doors. And when it failed, the man exhaled slowly. Funding disappeared. Reports vanished. People moved on. Caleb's jaw tightened. Except him. Silence settled between them again. Somewhere nearby, a clock ticked softly against concrete walls. Then suddenly the operating room doors opened. Emily stepped out, still wearing surgical gloves stained with antiseptic and exhaustion. Caleb stood so fast the coffee spilled across the floor unnoticed. Emily's eyes glistened beneath the fluorescent lights. For one terrible second, Caleb thought he already knew the answer. Then she smiled. Small, trembling, real. He made it. Caleb's breath left him all at once. The wall behind him suddenly became necessary just to stay standing. He covered his face briefly with one shaking hand while years of buried grief cracked open quietly inside his chest. No speeches came. No dramatic words. Only relief so deep it hurt. Emily stepped closer. The fragment was wrapped around old scar tissue near the brain stem. Another few hours and she stopped there. She did not need to finish. Caleb nodded silently, eyes wet beneath the harsh hallway lights. "Can I see him?" Emily smiled softly. "He has been trying to wake up since the surgery ended." Inside the recovery room, the lights were low and warm now. Rex lay curled beneath thick blankets, breathing slowly while soft rain whispered faintly against the distant windows upstairs. Part of the fur near his right ear had been shaved, revealing fresh stitches beneath silvered sable fur. The old German shepherd opened his eyes weakly the moment Caleb entered. And despite everything, despite the pain, the years, the hidden war still living inside him all this time, his tail thumped softly against the blanket. Caleb knelt beside him immediately. Rex rested his head against Caleb's chest with a tired sigh so full of trust it nearly broke him all over again. Outside, dawn slowly began touching the coastline beyond Camp Pendleton with pale gold light. And for the first time in years, neither of them was fighting to survive anymore. 3 weeks later, the rainstorms had finally disappeared from the California coast. Morning sunlight spilled gently across the small beachside house Caleb rented outside Oceanside. The windows were open. Salt air drifted quietly through the kitchen, carrying the distant sound of waves and seagulls somewhere beyond the shoreline. Rex lay near the living room window on an old navy blue blanket, while sunlight warmed the silver fur around his muzzle. The stitches near his ear had mostly healed now. Only a thin scar remained. Caleb stood at the kitchen counter pouring coffee into 2 mismatched mugs out of habit before realizing one belonged to nobody. He smiled faintly at himself, the kind of small sadness lonely people carry without speaking about it. Behind him, Rex slowly lifted his head. The old shepherd's ears twitched toward the sound of the coffee maker. Normal, peaceful, no trembling, no strange reactions to electricity, no frightened pacing at 3 in the morning. Just quiet, real quiet. Caleb carried his mug onto the porch overlooking the ocean and lowered himself carefully into the weathered wooden chair beside the railing. Rex followed slowly a few moments later. Older now, stiffer, but steady. The German shepherd settled beside Caleb's boots while early sunlight painted soft gold across the water. Neither moved for a long time. They simply listened. Waves rolling toward shore. Wind moving through distant palm trees. A fishing boat humming faintly near the horizon. The sounds of a world that no longer felt like war. Caleb reached down slowly and rested one hand against Rex's neck. Warm fur, steady breathing, alive. A memory drifted quietly through his mind then. Afghanistan. One freezing night beneath torn canvas, while mortar fire echoed far away through black mountains. Rex had curled against his side inside the tent, while young Marines played cards under dim lantern light, trying to pretend they were not afraid. Back then, Caleb believed survival depended on strength, on training, on never letting people see fear. But somewhere along the way, a German shepherd had taught him something different. Sometimes survival simply meant refusing to leave someone behind, even when they were broken, even when they could not save themselves. Rex slowly rested his head against Caleb's knee. The Marine looked down at him and smiled softly through tired eyes. "You stubborn old dog," he whispered. Rex's tail tapped once against the porch floor. Out near the shoreline, sunlight continued spreading across the Pacific like quiet forgiveness. And inside the small beachside house near Camp Pendleton, 2 old survivors finally learned what peace sounded like. Not silence, not victory, just the absence of fear. Some stories do not end with medals, or applause, or people remembering your name. Sometimes they end with a tired Marine drinking bad coffee beside the dog who saved his life more than once. Sometimes they end with soft waves outside an open window, with old scars healing quietly beneath morning sunlight, with loyalty that outlives war itself. And sometimes the soul that needed saving most was never the man at all.